Good morning everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Zara Kane, blah blah blah, you know the drill. Games Workshop has finally dropped the index cards for our beloved Genestealer course in 10th edition, but before you watch my take on the reveal, I strongly urge you to go over to warhammercommunity.com and just download the data sheets for free, read through them, try and understand them, form your own ideas and opinions before you let me come in yapping and talking shit, telling you what's good and what's bad, because honestly, what the fuck do I know? You know, I haven't played 10th edition yet, just like most people out there. We're all in the same boat now. I've got no first-hand reference of how the game flows now. All of the little tricks and nuances I used to enjoy about the faction are going to be reset, and we're all back to the drawing board. I did have a video prepped and primed about a week or two ago when the faction reveal first dropped and showcased the first hints of GSC's future, including the new cool ambush rule, but it seemed pointless to actually talk about that when we didn't really know, how all of our units were going to link up to it and relate to it. So before we crack on, let me just make this clear for the second time. Don't take my word as gospel. I'm still learning the new core rules myself. I'll still likely either miss some key things or cock something up. We're all human after all. Well, kind of anyway. I'm not going to spend too much time on each subject because we'll be here all day. Think of this as more like a, hit me with headlines sort of deal. Let's pick out the main changes. Anything that either vastly upsets me or makes me feel a little bit fuzzy, we'll cover it. I'm gonna have to split this video into two parts anyway, because covering the units is a big task unto itself. Let's get the new faction framework, unpacked first, and regardless, until the points values are revealed, which is probably about to happen right now whilst I'm recording this, it's hard for us to pick out what is going to be a solid choice, a steal or an absolute steaming pile of turkey bits. So let's kick it off. Cool ambush. You should all know about this by now. It's our new and much hyped army rule, which turns us into what can only be described as a horde survival mode faction. We have the ability to now infinitely respawn our troops. I think it's strong against certain other armies, namely the slow moving ones, and just dog shit against many others. And by that I mean the faster ones. Most importantly, you need to understand that sadly this means we have lost blip deployment. Setting up your army as a row of red or purple dots at the start of the game is now a thing of the past. So we're like any other faction who just, sets up our units in plain sight or huddled in huge numbers behind a few walls in a desperate bid not to get absolutely annihilated by the enemy's Alpha Strike. So say goodbye to all the mind games, the sneaky tricks and the associated tactical opportunities that came with that mechanic. Zara Kane does not approve, but it is what it is. But, as one door closes, another door opens. Cool Ambush is now a different kind of blip game. I'm going to try and explain it as simple as possible, step by step, in a very quick manner. When one of your units is destroyed entirely, we pull them off the board like usual, but then we roll a dice. If we get a 4+, instead of being dead, that unit goes straight into a Cool Ambush reserve pool. If we don't get a 4+, then they're just dead. Like, proper fucked. Troops, choices, or battle line units as they're now known, so that's neophytes and acolytes for us, get to add 3 to the roll. So that's always going to be at least a 4, so they automatically always live when they die. So that's happy days. They always go into that pool. Once we've done with the rolling business, we place a single ambush blip onto the table that's anywhere 9 inches away from the enemy, and that's us saying, okay, these guys died, but here's an identical gang who are going to come rushing in and take their place, and they're going to come in right here. You then have to wait until your opponent's next movement phase at the end of the reinforcement step. So they're going to move everything, they're going to deep strike stuff, and then we're going to reveal. If we lost multiple squads, of course we could end up with several blips on the board, and we can decide which unit in the ambush pool pops up from which blip, just like the old school deployment stuff. Don't forget also that these troops are then going to be able to move when it comes around to your turn. So unlike deep strike, you'll be dropping in, hopefully not getting annihilated and shot to shit, and then you'll be free to move and advance and shoot and charge, whatever, in the next turn to come. The caveat is that the enemy can destroy our ambush blips simply by moving near them. That's all they got to do. In their movement step, all they have to do is fly over with some jet bikes or something within 9 inches of that blip, and it just voids them. They just disappear, that's it. So you can instantly see why fast-moving armies are going to be our new arch nemesis. Or, for example, the new Grey Knights who just teleport around at will all the time. They're just going to shaft us hard. Against Death Guard, it's a different ball game. We're going to be laughing as they try to trundle across the board and try to delete these blips, and in the meantime we're just going to keep coming back. There's a few ways you can look at this mechanic overall. We can use it to pop up behind enemy lines, so even if they want to zip jet bikes over to avoid the blips, we're going to be pulling them backwards in the wrong direction to deal with those threats rather than towards the main fight where they typically would want to be. We can grab objectives, drop in behind ruins to trigger, actions next turn or set up ambushes. There's a lot of scope here, but I think many times we'll just get zoned out and then end up with very few opportunities or space to actually do this. Ultimately, a lot of us are probably just going to end up spawning on our very back line for fear of losing the blips otherwise. Note that we can mitigate losing the blips with the new Icon War character, who can snap one destroyed marker away from the spot it was lost and then basically teleport it back to near him. In my mind, Cult Ambush encourages a suicide wave approach with lots of cheap troops, literally throw them into combat, especially Acolytes. The mentality being that we could try and cheese this mechanic as much as possible, especially if we try to fight and die on our turn. Like, we move up, we charge, we throw those suicide Acolytes into melee, we kill as much as we can, and then in true Cult fashion, we just get absolutely smashed in return and we lose the whole squad. But if that happens in our turn, then we're reducing the time frame between losing our models and getting them straight back in the opponent's turn. So if we get shot at and lose a whole squad in their turn, we're not going to get them back for another whole battle round after that. See what I mean? Food for thought anyway. I'm just relating this new Cult Ambush rule to how I traditionally play the faction. So it's a lot of Acolytes, a total meat grinder of a first turn assault, keeping the enemy just like pinned into their half of the board. And then whilst they're dealing with that first wave, you've already got like a nice backlog of troops coming, in behind them, ready to jump straight into their place. The enemy cannot move out to destroy those blips if you have tied them up in their own half. Every index army is going to get a single star in detachment. This part I'm kind of disappointed about for us. It's called Day of Ascension, and it's basically just exploding sixes to hit when that unit arrives from deep strike or back from ambush or whatever. This applies to the end of your next fight phase, so it does include melee hits too, but I'm not really a near-fight kind of guy traditionally, so straight away I'm not going to see that as being anything too special. There are some combos to be seen, especially arising from the new Ridge Runner, so hold your breath on that. If you want to benefit from this in melee, you're still going to have to make the charge first. So straight out of deep strike, that's back to the old-fashioned 9-inch Hail Mary, which is dog shit. I've always said never ever try to deep strike charge unless you've got some kind of buff, to bring that distance down. But here's the spoiler: we've got none of those now, so that sucks. The only way it'll work realistically is if you pop up from a new ambush blip with a melee squad. They don't get killed in the enemy shooting phase or whatever, and then in your turn to come, you can then just move and then charge at a shorter range. In that situation, sure, I'd love extra hits with big mining tools or whatever. That can actually make a difference. Okay, Brood Brothers. Quickly touching on this, it's actually kind of good news in some ways. The 500 point limit still applies for a 2000 points army, which is what most people play, and without detachment role restrictions like HQ and troops and elites, etc. So you literally just pack out that 500 points with whatever you want. Of course, there are restrictions, but those have been somewhat scaled back. You'll see a brief list of things we can't get, like named characters. Sly Marbo, for example, you can't, paint his head pink and then give him an extra arm. So there's also no Ogrins, Bulgrins, Commissars, Tempestus Scions, or aircraft, Rattling Snipers, stuff like that. So it means that the entire Cadian range is back on the menu, notably Kazakin, which is cool. They're the heavy infantry stormtroopers, are very nice. All the artillery, the tanks, the Rough Riders, even Baneblades, it's all up for the taking. However, here's the problem. The Guard have mostly been stripped back to their 4+ ballistic skill. The turret rule that was introduced for like 3 months for while that book applied has been snipped away again, so tanks and stuff are all going to be hitting on 4+ without any inbuilt buffs. So their offensive ability is back into the not so great territory. Sure, they've got orders like take aim, but that is now their army rule. Like, we've got Cult Ambush, they've got orders, so we cannot access those. We obviously do not get to benefit from their detachment rule either, which is like the Born Soldiers thing, or by extension any of the stratagems or enhancements, so that's also a bit of a kick in the balls. So in my mind, I think we should only really be looking at bringing in units that have other purposes beyond damage output, and they won't rely on command functionality to operate. Rough Riders don't seem like a bad shout, and finally we could mix them alongside Jackals like I mentioned in the past for 60 of these bike shape. You could convert them into bikes or have all horses or whatever, and you could have this massive just horde of fast moving shit. I mean, they actually stole the same fallback and charge mechanic that our Jackals used to have and have now just lost, which lots of people still think that the Death Strike is an excellent area denial tool with its ability to place a fire marker and then threaten a huge amount of damage to multiple squads if they stumble into it or just fail to evacuate out of it. There's lots of food for thought, but let's not get into Brood Brothers too specifically here before we even cover our own units. So instead of Warlord traits, we now have enhancements, which you can just apply to any character. We've got 4 of them. The first one being Inscrutable Cunning. This is probably my favorite of the bunch. It basically gives the bearer and whatever unit is attached to the ability to set up anywhere on the board 9 inches away from the enemy, like the infiltrator keyword basically. The new Patriarch and the Pure Strains can do that for free, but now you could do this, for example, with an Abominant and a whole gang of Aberrants, you know, just ready at the front lines. If you get the first turn, you can just charge them straight in. And you guys know that I love a first turn bloodbath on the enemy deployment line. It's my bread and butter. Sure, you might not get those Aberrants back, but if we did it with Acolytes and a character maybe, we're guaranteed to get them back as soon as they've run up and done their little suicide mission. If that's not enough, we also get half a chance of refunding 1 CP every time we use a stratagem on them. Prowling Adjutant has been another much discussed enhancement in the GSC Discord today or yesterday, whatever it was. Many of you guys are pumped to whack this on a Jackal Alphas to triple cheese her mortal wound spam combo. It's all in the wording, so you know, listen up for this one. It's basically the bearer gets to make a normal move of D6 anytime the enemy moves, advances or fall back, you know, within 9 inches of them. So it's in their turn, not ours, and it doesn't come into play if they're charged like they used to. What's got everyone's dick so hard is that the Jackals and their ability to dump mortal wounds each time they end a move within 6 inches of an enemy unit. With the Alphas attached, she has the ability to make a normal move of 6 inches after she shoots, so therefore the Jackals inherit that ability, so they move, throw a load of mortals, and then because of the Alphas they move again, throw a load more mortals, and then you could do it a 3rd time with this upgrade. You know, it's basically just a bit ridiculous. If you really wanted to, you could also activate the grenade stratagem and add that to the tally. It works just the same. Personally, I think, you know, it's kind of funky, but I don't think it's going to be as good as people, you know, keep assuming it's going to be. Those Jackals are going to get cut down, and that reduces the amount of dice you can roll, and then it's just like, okay, that's not going to actually get me as many mortals as I think it will do on paper. Anyway, we have the boring option, Meticulous Planner, the return of one of those classic increase the stratagem cost for your opponent by 1 for the rest of the game. Sure, it's nice, and with a smaller pool of more focused, you know, specific stratagems, I can see it being applicable, but it lacks the real sneaky ha feeling when, you know, some of these other upgrades are like a bit more fierce. Lastly, there's another classic, which is Focus for Adoration. I thought this was great in 9th edition, and when I pulled it off, I always managed to feel like you'd sprung a genuine trap on your opponent. It was quite hard to see it coming. People would often forget that, you know, you had a certain character who had it, like in the Brood Coven, I'd sometimes put it on like a Primus or something, who I wouldn't normally bother with, but Heroic Interventions are now very different as a 2 CP stratagem that any unit can access rather than characters doing it for free. This upgrade not only makes it free for the bearer and their attached gang to declare a rapid countercharge against an incoming enemy squad, but if you happen to give it to a Locus, they'll also be granting Fights First for your boys, and Fights First is now literally that. You do fight first, not just, you know, the enemy charging and then over to you. It's you first. So basically, you know, you're getting to jump into the fray and carve up your enemies before they get to swing. Fucking love it. Yeah, again, it's one of those awesome, genuine surprise motherfucker moments. I can't wait to try with him lurking in the shadows with a load of metamorphs. Stratagems. Now, these are pretty cool if you ask me. You'll recognise most of them as old 9th edition ploys that have been given a bit of a twist and a facelift and been basically recycled. Unquestioning Loyalty has made it back into the faction as a stratagem, which is not the worst idea in the world. It doesn't come up that often in a game, I suppose, but they have turned the way it works inside out. Just like back in 8th edition, you now only have to tow in a single model from a unit within 3 inches to get unlimited meat shields from that squad. So you can just feed them over. It doesn't have to be the guy who's literally, you know, next to the character. Now it's also automatic, so you don't have to roll for it. You just get to consume as many hapless goons as you want for free. But it is per wound lost now, not per save failed. You can no longer, you know, absorb a single Vanquisher cannon shell into the forehead of a single neophyte and just tank it all like that. Instead, you have to cull a number of models equal to how many wounds you would have lost on your Patriarch or whoever's going to take them. In my eyes, that's not a bad trade-off. I'm pretty happy with it. Granted, a lot of your characters are going to be embedded within a squad already, but this is going to come in useful when that squad gets wiped out, leaving them on the lonesome, or if the enemy is packing sniper rifles. You know, there's still loads of ways it will come in useful. Coordinated Trap is the rebirth of the Exposed mechanic, or for those of you new to the party, the ability to get +1 to wound. This was previously for guns only, so spamming auto guns, flamethrowers and stuff was the typical application for it, but now it applies to melee too, which is awesome. As always, you get the most mileage out of this when going for the lowest strength, cheapest, you know, or basically the free weapon profiles that we have loads of. It may cost 2 CP, and you may only be able to activate it on 2 units max, focusing on one target together. But don't forget, you can combine it with other buffs like extra AP and exploding hits. This is an absolute goldmine when facing off against really tough, expensive, big units like a Knight or whatever, or a Baneblade, whatever. Perfect for combining with a new Nexus, who can reduce its cost to 0 CP multiple times throughout the game. Think of it as our Oath of Moment combo. We just, think. Tunnel Crawlers is the recycled version of Lying in Wait. Always a popular upgrade in the old book that lets us get our deep striking units up at 3-inch range. You just pop up and you can snag poorly guarded objectives, or get a gang of acolytes with loads of demo charges to hurl them all in one go. You can do that now, 4 demo charges. As always, remember though, there is no charging after you do this. The Perfect Ambush, it's another old upgrade getting a slight facelift. This time it's just a nice and simple boost of adding an extra pip of AP and +1 to the ballistic skill when you pop up from cool ambush or whatever. For 1 CP, you cannot really argue with this, and it's going to combo very nicely with Coordinated Trap, that's the +1 to wound thingy, and also the new Ridge Runner crossfire mechanic. Yes, they had to call it that, to give it at least a little nod, but it's another method to get extra AP against a specific target. Basically, using all of these things together, we can stack +2 AP, +1 to hit, +1 to wound, exploding sixes, not to mention any rerolls from a Primus or whatever you've got going nearby. I can already see this being a default Neophyte or Acolyte Bomb. Many of this will pack out to drop in and smash the biggest threats of your opponent's army. It's easy, just do it, why not? Last of all, we see one of my personal favourites from 9th make a comeback, and this time it's much more usable. It's called One with the Darkness now, which is much cheaper at 1 CP, and it provides either the stealth ability, which is simply -1 to hit, kind of like the smoke screen stratagem, but also if that squad is further away than 12 inches from the enemy, they just flat out cannot target you. Against Astra Militarum, artillery and shit like that, this can really put a dent in enemy plans. They just can't get you. Also, don't forget that Nexus can allow double use for this stratagem, so you could easily keep 2 essential squads safe from enemy big guns if they keep their distance. Oh, I almost forgot, there's also Return to the Shadows, which sees some key changes. Now you trigger this at the end of your opponent's turn. Personally, I prefer the old way, you trigger at the end of your turn. You used to rush Pure Strains up, kill something, and then dip straight back into Deep Strike. But whatever, we can now choose 2 units rather than just 1. You cannot do it if they're tied up in combat, and you can't use it on bikes since they do not have the Deep Strike keyword anymore. I suppose the main application for this would be to reposition key squads to opposite ends of the board, ready for your turn that's about to begin, deep striking them straight back in, and in the process reactivating their ability to access buffs like Exploding Sixes, Perfect Ambush, and all that shit. Not bad. Okay, let's tie up all of this knowledge and see where it leaves us. I think the big dividing opinion right now still lies with our main army rule, the respawning of units with Cool Ambush. Whilst the majority of the 40k community lost a shit about it, having only understood the broad strokes, a lot of newbies are also looking at this and not really clocking the true potential of it, or its glaring downfalls. The big ones, I think, are its weakness versus jump pack infantry, jet bikes, teleporting Grey Knights, and of course anything that can deep strike. If the enemy wants to shut down our ability to repopulate and has those sort of units in their roster, they're just going to do it. It's really not that hard to get within 9 inches of a blip. 9 inches is big, and they're going to have a lot of stuff on the board. It gets pretty tight, turn 2, turn 3 onwards. I think things could fall apart for us very quickly, and then we're stuck fighting with what we've got left on the board. Don't forget that typically you'll lose squads in the opponent's turn, so in truth you might only get 2 chances to respawn something anyway before the game's over. This is not going to be one of the situations where there's these constant waves coming at you. It's going to happen maybe twice, and that's it. Once people get the hang of it, I think once opponents start to learn to counter it, I think we might find it becomes a very different ball game where the opportunities to get creative are higher, but our enemies will be more than practiced at knowing exactly how those ploys are going to work. Again, like I said before, I think the key will be board control. The more we contain our opponents, we box them in on all sides, the more options we'll have to repopulate behind the front line and stay in relative safety and then keep the pressure on. The true cheese will be to try and do the melee damage in your turn, like I said before, and then during the fight phase, they slap back, you lose those troops, because you always do lose those troops, and then, we just get them straight back into the fight as soon as possible. It's like a conveyor belt meat grinder. I'm pretty sure Acolytes will be cheap enough to do so in any list, so I don't see an excuse not to. Sadly, I think that deep strike charging as an overall strategy is completely dead. There is no option whatsoever for increasing the chances of successfully popping up and jumping into the fray. No 3d6 trap trap sprung, or +1 from an icon ward and their old banner, or any overall faction bonus. You know, this is really going to hurt newbies who relied on that deep strike charge handicap to mitigate their troops' vulnerability. It's going to be time for them to learn the hard way to rely on terrain, transports, and pure trickery just to, you know, stay alive and get in there. I, for one, will be definitely using the one with the darkness stratagem a lot just to keep a Soul Squad alive long enough to move up and charge next turn. As for the rest of the index, I think it's great that we've retained some access to Crossfire style abilities. Sure, we have to pay CP to benefit in most cases, but I think with the right character support, you know, we can mitigate those nicely. At the moment, we really do lack options for targeting higher toughness targets like tanks. You know, we've basically got mining lasers now, and that's it. Even the aberrants, you know, they don't have the strength to tackle tanks anymore. They're like strength 8, I think it is. You know, that used to be their speciality. You could send in aberrants and smash the shit out of anything. Now, we're going to be wounding on 5s unless we use, you know, the coordinated trap, whatever stratagem. I think the only other route we could go down is literally the massed firearms approach, which is, you know, just getting as many auto guns, hand flamers and shit as you can, and just getting +1 to hit, +1 to wound, getting the double AP buffs, exploding 6s, all the rerolls we can, and then, you know, just try and swamp them in that shit. Otherwise, it's going to be metamorphs and pure strains with lethal hits and devastating wounds. What are the choices we got? If our troops remain cheap enough, it could just be a case of swarming enemy armor and just trying to keep them tied up and bogged down under disposable suicide squads. Lastly, we all know that the Genestealer cults are historically great at playing the objective game. I do not see this changing in the slightest. We should be popping up all over the board constantly throughout the game, just, you know, sending the opponent in different directions. Oh god, we're over there now, gotta go deal with them, and oh my god, oh shit, they're over there now. You know, they're going to be going in so many different directions that they lose track of what they're doing, whilst we are getting actions done. We're grabbing objectives, you know, we're just sending them into disarray. That's always been the name of the game, and it still will be. Hopefully by the time I've finished recording this right now, the points values will be out, and then I'll do a part 2 video where we'll actually look at each individual unit. We'll discuss all the main changes, you know, what they gained, what they lost. In the case of Patriarch, I can't give him upgrades anymore. But, you know, it is what it is. There's good stuff, there's bad stuff. But everything's going to change, and you just got to basically get yourself out of that 9th edition mindset now and just think, right, this is, you know, that's just a thing of the past now. Just chop it off, here be new stuff, and then just go ahead with a fresh mentality. So I'll see you soon, guys. Thanks for listening, and come back soon. Let's get cracking.